High Chancellor Vexar stood before the massive viewing screen in the command center of the Zepyrian flagship. His forearms moved in careful patterns as he studied the star maps displayed before him. The 12 species that made up the galactic hegemony had ruled this part of space for over 3,000 years. They had built great cities on distant worlds, created trade routes that spanned hundreds of light years, and maintained peace through careful diplomacy and overwhelming force. But now there was a problem. A new species had appeared in their territory. These creatures called themselves humans, and they were spreading faster than any species the hegemony had ever encountered. "Show me the human expansion again," Vexar commanded his aide, a tall, blue-skinned creature named Kalara. The star map changed, showing a small yellow star called Sol at the edge of hegemony space. Red dots began appearing around it, each one representing a human colony or outpost. The expansion pattern was unlike anything the hegemony had seen before. Where other species moved carefully, establishing 1 or 2 colonies per decade, the humans were creating dozens of settlements every year. They have established 47 colonies in the past 5 years. Kellner reported their ships appear primitive by our standards, but they are building them in massive numbers. Our intelligence suggests they have over 2,000 vessels of various sizes. Vexar's main eyes narrowed, while his secondary eyes continued to study the display. "What do we know about their military capabilities?" "Limited," another aide replied. This one was a insect-like creature from the hive worlds. They use projectile weapons and chemical explosives. No energy shields, no plasma cannons, no matter disruptors. Their technology appears to be at least 200 years behind our own. The Chancellor nodded slowly. This was what made the human expansion so puzzling. How could such a primitive species spread so quickly? Most young civilizations took centuries to establish even a handful of colonies. The humans had done it in less than a decade. "Perhaps they do not understand the rules," suggested Fleet Admiral Morak, a reptilian warrior from the conquest-happy Saurian Empire. "Young species often make mistakes. They expand too quickly, claim territory that belongs to others." "We have dealt with this before," Vexar agreed. The hegemony had faced dozens of upstart species over the millennia. The solution was always the same: a show of force followed by negotiations. The young species would realize they were outmatched, agree to reasonable borders, and eventually apply for membership in the hegemony. It was a process that had worked for 3,000 years. "Send the usual message," Vexar ordered. "Inform them that they have violated hegemony space and must withdraw to their home system immediately. Give them the standard 30 rotations to respond." The message was transmitted within hours. It followed the traditional format that had been used for centuries. The hegemony identified itself, listed the territories that had been violated, and demanded immediate withdrawal. The message also included a demonstration of hegemony power, detailed scans of human colonies, showing that the hegemony could destroy them at any time. The humans responded within 6 hours. This was unusually fast. Most species took weeks to craft a proper diplomatic response. The Hegemony Council gathered to hear what was surely going to be either a surrender or a request for negotiations. The human message was displayed on the main screen. Vexar expected to see a formal diplomatic document filled with flowery language and requests for mercy. Instead, he saw 3 lines of text: message received, terms rejected, response incoming. The council chamber fell silent. Admiral Morak was the first to speak. "That is not a proper diplomatic response. Where are their requests for negotiation? Where are their offers of tribute?" Kelnara checked the message again. "Chancellor, this appears to be the complete response. There is nothing else." Vexar felt a strange sensation in his chest. In 3,000 years of hegemony history, no species had ever responded to an ultimatum with such brevity. Young civilizations were supposed to be afraid. They were supposed to beg for mercy, offer tribute, request face-to-face meetings with hegemony representatives. "Perhaps it is a translation error," suggested the representative from the Silicon Federation. "Their language systems may not be compatible with our diplomatic protocols." "No," Kellner replied after checking her instruments. "The translation is accurate. They said exactly what appears on the screen." The silence stretched on. Finally, Admiral Mork stood up, his scales rattling with anger. "This is an insult. No primitive species refuses the hegemony's generous offer of negotiation. We should destroy one of their colonies as an example. Wait, Vexor said, raising one of his 4 hands. Something about the human response bothered him. Most species would either surrender immediately or try to buy time with negotiations. The humans had done neither. They had simply said no and promised a response. What kind of response could a primitive species possibly send? Double our patrols along the human border, he ordered, and bring the 3rd Fleet to full readiness. If the humans want to be stubborn, we will show them what happens to species that refuse hegemony generosity. Meanwhile, in a secret facility, buried deep beneath the surface of Luna Earth's moon, Admiral Sarah Chen was reading the same message that had just been sent to the hegemony. She sat in a chair that had been carved from a single piece of asteroid rock, surrounded by screens that showed the positions of every human ship in known space. Chen was not like the politicians who ran Earth's government. She was a military officer trained in the harsh realities of space combat. She had fought in the Titan Rebellion, the Mars Independence War, and the brutal campaign to clear the asteroid belt of pirates. She knew that when someone threatened humanity, there were only 2 options: surrender or fight. The hegemony thought humanity would choose surrender. They were wrong. Activate Protocol 7. Chen ordered her aide, a young captain named Roberts, and send a message to Captain Vulov. Tell him it's time. Roberts turned pale. Protocol 7 was the most classified military order in human history. Only 12 people in the entire solar system knew what it meant. Admiral, are you certain? Once we begin, there's no going back. Chen looked at the star chart showing human colonies scattered across dozens of worlds. Each one represented millions of human lives. Families who had left Earth to build new homes among the stars. Children who had never seen the planet where their species was born. All of them now threatened by aliens who thought humans would simply give up and crawl back to their home system. I'm certain, Chen replied. Send the message. Captain Marcus Vulov received the message while floating in zero gravity, aboard the most secret ship in human space. The vessel had no official name, no registration number, and according to all public records, it did not exist. The crew called it Nemesis, and for good reason. Volkov was not like other ship captains. He had volunteered for missions that other officers considered suicide. He had led boarding parties against pirate ships, fought hand-to-hand combat in the ET corridors of enemy vessels, and once destroyed an entire rebel base by ramming his damaged ship into their reactor core. His crew called him Reaper, and he had never lost a battle. The message from Admiral Chen was short. Execute Omega Protocol. Target hegemony authorization mankind. Volkov smiled, but it was not a pleasant expression. He had been waiting for this order for 5 years. The Nemesis had been built for one purpose: to show the galaxy what happened when someone threatened humanity. Today, the aliens were going to learn why humans were the most dangerous species in known space. All hands, prepare for departure, Volkov announced over the ship's communication system. We have work to do. The Nemesis began to move. It was smaller than most military vessels, only 300 meters long compared to the kilometer-long dreadnoughts that other species preferred. But size did not matter when you were carrying the most dangerous weapon ever created by human minds. Back on the Hegemony flagship, sensors detected the movement of a single human ship leaving their territory. Admiral Mordak laughed when he saw the readings. One ship, he said to Chancellor Vexar. They send one small ship against the combined might of 12 civilizations. These humans are even more primitive than we thought. Vexar was not laughing. Something about the situation felt wrong. Species that were about to surrender did not send ships toward enemy territory. They sent diplomats. They sent messages begging for mercy. What type of ship is it? He asked his sensor operator. Unknown class, came the reply. It appears to be some kind of escort vessel. No heavy weapons detected, minimal shielding. It poses no threat to our forces. But Vexar had not survived 3 centuries of politics by ignoring his instincts. He had learned to pay attention when something felt wrong, even if he could not explain why. Send a message to all fleet commanders, he ordered. Increase alert status to yellow, and I want constant updates on that human ship. The Nemesis continued its journey toward the edge of human space, where the combined fleets of the Galactic Hegemony waited. Captain Vulov stood on the bridge, watching the stars ahead. In a few hours, he would reach the coordinates where the alien fleet was gathering. In a few hours, the galaxy would learn what humans did when someone threatened their children. His crew worked quietly around him. They all knew this was likely a one-way mission. The Omega Protocol had been designed with one goal: maximum damage to enemy forces regardless of cost. Survival was not part of the plan. "Captain," his communications officer called out, "we're receiving a message from the alien fleet. They're demanding that we stop and surrender." Vulov did not even look at the message. "Send our standard response." "What should I tell them, sir?" Vulkov's smile became even colder. "Tell them they should have negotiated when they had the chance." The message was transmitted, and the Nemesis continued on its course. Behind it, the combined fleets of the galactic hegemony prepared for what they thought would be an easy victory against a single primitive ship. They had no idea what was coming. In the depths of space, ancient laws of physics waited to be broken. Technologies that violated every known principle of safe warfare sat ready to be unleashed. And at the center of it all, Captain Marcus Volkov prepared to show the galaxy why humans had never lost a war. The aliens wanted to know what humanity would send instead of negotiators. They were about to find out. The Nemesis moved through space like a shadow among the stars. To anyone watching from the outside, it looked like just another human military vessel. 300 meters of dark metal and ceramic plating, no different from the hundreds of other ships that protected human colonies. But Captain Marcus Vulov knew better. He knew what lay hidden in the ship's core, sealed behind layers of security that would make a bank vault look like a toy box. Volkov stood in the ship's command center, watching the tactical display as they approached the edge of human space. The alien fleet was gathering at the border, just as Admiral Chen had predicted. 12 different species, all thinking they could intimidate humanity into surrender with a show of force. Status report. Volkov ordered his first officer, Commander Lisa Park. Park had served with Volkov for 8 years, following him through conflicts that most officers would not survive. She was one of the few people in the fleet who truly understood what the Nemesis was designed to do. "We're 6 hours from the target zone," Park reported. "All systems are operating within normal parameters. The crew is ready." Volkov nodded. The crew of the Nemesis was unlike any other in the human fleet. Every single person aboard had volunteered for what they called the final mission. They all knew that once the Omega Protocol was activated, there would be no going home. The weapon they carried was too dangerous to risk falling into enemy hands. "Sir," the communications officer called out, "we're receiving another message from the alien fleet. They're demanding that we identify ourselves and state our intentions." "Ignore it," Volkov replied. "They'll learn our intentions soon enough." The truth was that the Nemesis had no official classification in the human military. According to all public records, the ship did not exist. It had been built in secret at a hidden facility beyond Pluto, using technologies that most human scientists considered impossible or insane. The project had required the combined efforts of humanity's best minds in physics, engineering, and computer science. Dr. Elizabeth Kane, the ship's science officer, approached Volkov with a tablet displaying complex equations. Kane was one of the scientists who had designed the weapon now sleeping in the ship's core. She was also the only person aboard who fully understood how it worked. "Captain, I need to review the activation sequence one more time," Kane said. "Once we begin the process, there will be no way to stop it. Are you certain we want to proceed?" Vulov took the tablet and looked at the equations that described humanity's most terrible creation. The mathematics hurt his head, but he understood the basic principle. The weapon was not designed to destroy ships or planets. It was designed to destroy civilizations. "Doctor, how many human colonies are in the disputed territory?" he asked. 47 confirmed settlements, Kane replied. "Approximately 15 million people. And how many of those people do you think the aliens will spare if we surrender?" Kane was quiet for a moment. She had read the intelligence reports about the galactic hegemony. Their history was filled with examples of what happened to species that refused to submit. Some were enslaved. Others were relocated to reservations on barren worlds. A few simply disappeared from the historical record. "I understand, Captain," she said finally. "I'll begin the preliminary activation sequence." As Kane walked away, Commander Park moved closer to Vulov. "Marcus, she said quietly, using his first name, as she only did when they were discussing something serious. Are we doing the right thing? Maybe the aliens are willing to negotiate. Maybe we don't have to use the weapon. Volkov understood her concern. Park had children back on Earth, a daughter who was just starting school, and a son who wanted to join the space fleet when he grew up. The thought of those children growing up in a galaxy where humanity was forced to hide in a single star system was unbearable. Lisa, he said, what do you think would happen if we went back to Earth and told them we chose not to use our advantage? How long do you think it would be before another alien empire decided humans looked weak? Park nodded slowly. She had fought in enough battles to understand the logic of deterrence. Sometimes the only way to prevent a war was to show your enemies that the cost of fighting you was too high to bear. Besides, Vulov continued, the aliens had their chance to negotiate. They chose to send an ultimatum instead. Now they get to see what humans send instead of diplomats. The Nemesis continued toward the border, its engines humming quietly in the darkness. In the engineering sections, the crew made final preparations for what was coming. They checked and double-checked every system, knowing that a single malfunction could doom not just their mission, but potentially the entire human species. Chief Engineer Tom Rodriguez supervised the work with the intensity of a man who knew that millions of lives depended on his equipment functioning perfectly. Rodriguez had built engines for colony ships and weapons for warships, but nothing he had ever worked on compared to the device now waiting in the ship's core. Chief, one of his technicians called out, the containment field is showing some fluctuation. Should we be concerned? Rodriguez moved to the console and studied the readings. The fluctuation was tiny, well within acceptable parameters. But with this weapon, even tiny variations could have catastrophic consequences. Run a full diagnostic, he ordered, and increase the field strength by 5%. I don't want any surprises. The weapon that gave the Nemesis its terrible purpose was the result of humanity's darkest scientific achievement. It had been created by a team of researchers who had asked themselves a simple question. What was the most efficient way to destroy an advanced technological civilization? The answer they had found was both elegant and horrifying. Instead of building bigger bombs or more powerful energy weapons, they had created something that turned an enemy's own technology against them. The weapon was a form of self-replicating nanotechnology, but unlike anything that had ever been built before. The nanobots were designed to consume and convert any non-human technology they encountered. They would spread through enemy ships like a virus, turning hull plating into more nanobots, converting computer systems into manufacturing centers, using the enemy's own resources to build more copies of themselves. But the truly terrifying part was that the nanobots were programmed to distinguish between human and alien technology. They would consume a hegemony battleship down to the last bolt, but they would not touch so much as a human flashlight. It was a weapon of absolute discrimination, designed to leave human forces completely untouched, while destroying everything else. The project had been codenamed Pandora, and like the mythical box, once it was opened, there would be no closing it again. Dr. Kane finished the preliminary activation sequence and reported to the bridge. Captain, the weapon is ready for deployment. All we need is your final authorization code. Volkov looked at the tactical display one more time. The alien fleet was massive, over 3,000 ships representing the combined military might of 12 different species. By any reasonable measure, the Nemesis should have been destroyed the moment it entered their weapons range. But reason had nothing to do with what was about to happen. Sir, the sensor operator reported, we're detecting movement in the alien fleet. They're moving to intercept us. How long until they're in weapons range? Volkov asked. 20 minutes, sir? Volkov nodded. It was time to send humanity's message to the galaxy. He walked to the command console and entered his personal authorization code. A new display appeared, showing a single red button labeled with words that made even seasoned warriors pause. Omega Protocol Final Authorization. All hands. This is the captain. Vulov announced over the ship's communication system. In 15 minutes, we will engage the enemy fleet. Remember that we're not just fighting for ourselves. We're fighting for every human child who deserves to grow up free among the stars. We're fighting for the right of our species to exist, without permission from aliens who think they own the galaxy. He paused, looking around at his crew. They were all volunteers, all people who had chosen to risk everything for the future of humanity. The aliens wanted to know what humans send, instead of negotiators, he continued. Today they find out. Prepare for weapons deployment. Dr. Kane took her position at the weapons control station. The Nemesis carried conventional weapons as well, missiles and energy cannons that could fight off a few enemy ships. But those weapons were just for show. The real weapon was something that no alien empire had ever faced before. Weapon status? Volkov asked. Ready for deployment, Captain? Kane replied. The nanobots are stable and awaiting release command. The alien fleet grew larger on the tactical display as they approached. Volkov could see individual ship classes now. Zephyrin dreadnoughts, Saurian assault cruisers, Silicon Federation, science vessels. Thousands of years of galactic civilization represented in that fleet. All of it about to learn what happened when someone threatened humanity's children. Sir, the communications officer reported. The aliens are transmitting a final surrender demand. They're giving us one last chance to turn back. Volkov smiled, but there was no warmth in it. Send them our response. What should I tell them, sir? Tell them that humanity appreciates their concern for our welfare, Volkov replied. And tell them that they should have thought about the consequences before they threatened our colonies. The message was transmitted, and the Nemesis continued on its course toward the waiting alien fleet. In a few minutes, the most advanced military force in galactic history would face humanity's answer to their ultimatum. They had wanted to know what humans would send instead of diplomats. They were about to find out. Admiral Keithmore of the Zephyrian Navy stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Infinite Glory, watching as the single human vessel approached his fleet. Around him, the greatest military force in galactic history waited in perfect formation. 3,000 ships from 12 different civilizations, each one representing centuries of advanced technology and military experience. The human ship was laughably small compared to his dreadnoughts. The Infinite Glory alone was over 2 kilometers long. Armed with plasma cannons that could crack a planet's crust and protected by energy shields that could withstand the explosion of a star, the approaching human vessel looked like a toy by comparison. Admiral, his tactical officer reported, the human ship is now within weapons range. Shall we disable it and take the crew prisoner? Keithmore considered the question. Standard procedure would be to disable the ship and capture its crew for interrogation. The hegemony could learn valuable information about human military capabilities. But something about the situation bothered him. Why would the humans send a single ship against such overwhelming odds? Open a communication channel, he ordered. I want to speak with whoever commands that vessel. The main screen activated, showing the bridge of the human ship. Keithmore found himself looking at a middle-aged human male with cold, dark eyes and several scars across his face. The human wore a simple military uniform, with no decorations or medals. I am Admiral Keithmore of the Galactic Hegemony, he announced. You are Captain Vulov, the human replied. His voice was calm, showing no fear despite being outnumbered 3,000 to 1. Captain Vulov, you are in violation of hegemony space. Surrender immediately, and your crew will be treated according to galactic law. Volkov smiled, but it was not a pleasant expression. Admiral, I appreciate your concern for my crew's welfare, but I'm afraid we're not here to surrender. Keithmore felt a flash of anger. How dare this primitive alien show such disrespect? Captain, you have 1 ship. I have 3,000. Your species uses primitive projectile weapons while we command the power of stars themselves. What possible threat could you pose to this fleet? You're about to find out, Volkov replied and cut the communication. Keithmore stared at the blank screen for a moment, then turned to his weapons officer. Target their engines. I want that ship disabled, not destroyed. We'll show these humans what happens to species that refuse hegemony generosity. But before the weapons officer could respond, the sensor operator called out an alarm. Admiral, the human ship is releasing some kind of payload. Multiple objects, very small, spreading in all directions. On the tactical display, Keithmore could see what looked like a cloud of metallic dust expanding from the human vessel. The particles were tiny, barely detectable by his sensors, and they were moving in all directions at incredible speed. What are they? He demanded. Unknown, sir, the sensor operator replied. They appear to be some kind of metallic particles. but they're too small to analyze properly. Keithmore laughed. Chaff. They're trying to confuse our sensors with primitive chaff. He turned to his communications officer. Send a message to all ships. Tell them not to be fooled by this pathetic display. Begin the attack. The hegemony fleet opened fire. Thousands of energy beams and plasma bolts converged on the human ship, enough firepower to destroy a small moon. But to everyone's surprise, the human vessel's shields held. They flickered and sparked under the massive assault, but they did not fail. Impossible, Keithmore muttered. Their technology is primitive. Those shields should have collapsed immediately. Sir, the tactical officer reported, our weapons are having minimal effect. The human ship appears to have some kind of adaptive shielding. Keithmore was about to order a concentrated assault when his sensor operator called out again, this time with panic in his voice. Admiral, something's wrong with the Crimson Talon. On the display, one of the Saurian assault cruisers was behaving strangely. Its hull plating seemed to be moving, shifting, and flowing like liquid metal. As they watched, pieces of the ship's armor began to fall away, but instead of floating in space, they seemed to be dissolving into more of the metallic particles. What's happening to that ship? Keithmore demanded. Before anyone could answer, alarms began sounding throughout the infinite glory. The ship's computer announced, warning, unauthorized access detected in secondary computer systems. Warning, hull breach in Section 7. Warning, life support failure in Deck 12. Keithmore felt ice form in his blood. There had been no impact, no explosion, no attack of any kind. How could his ship be suffering multiple system failures? Engineering report, he shouted. The chief engineer's voice came over the communication system, and Keith could hear fear in it. Admir, we have a problem. Something is in our computer systems. It's rewriting our code, taking control of our fabrication units. And sir, it's converting our own hull plating into more of itself. On the tactical display, more ships were beginning to show the same symptoms. Hulls flowing like water, internal systems failing, pieces of the ships themselves dissolving into clouds of metallic particles that then spread to nearby vessels. Sir, the sensor operator reported, his voice barely above a whisper. The particles are nanobots. They're self-replicating, and they're converting our ships into more nanobots. Keithmore stared at the display in horror as he finally understood what was happening. The humans had not sent a conventional weapon. They had sent a plague, a technological virus that consumed everything it touched and used the consumed material to make more of itself. All ships, emergency retreat, he ordered. Maximum speed. Get away from the infected vessels. But it was too late. The nanobots had already spread to dozens of ships, and each infected vessel became a source of more nanobots. The cloud of metallic particles grew larger and larger, spreading faster than the fleeing ships could travel. The Crimson Talon was the first ship to be completely consumed. In less than 10 minutes, the kilometer-long assault cruiser dissolved entirely, leaving behind only a swirling cloud of nanobots that immediately began seeking new targets. Admiral, the communications officer reported, we're receiving distress calls from across the fleet. Ships are reporting system failures, hull breaches, loss of life support. The nanobots are spreading faster than we can retreat. Keithmore watched in fascination and terror as the greatest military force in galactic history began to dissolve before his eyes. The nanobots showed no mercy, no discrimination. They consumed Zaffiran dreadnoughts and Silicon Confederation science vessels with equal efficiency. Advanced plasma cannons and primitive projectile weapons were converted into more nanobots with the same mechanical precision. Sir, the tactical officer said, the human ship is transmitting a message. It's being broadcast on all frequencies. Put it on screen. Keithmore ordered. Captain Volkov appeared again, still calm despite the chaos surrounding his vessel. This is Captain Marcus Volkov, of the human starship Nemesis. You wanted to know what humanity sends instead of negotiators. This is what we send. We don't just fight back when threatened. We make sure the threat is eliminated permanently. He paused, looking directly at the camera. Your ultimatum demanded that humanity withdraw to our home system and abandon our colonies. You threatened to use force against civilian populations, including children. You believed that superior numbers and advanced technology would make us surrender. Around the Nemesis, The HFY fleet continued to dissolve. Ships that had ruled the galaxy for centuries were being consumed by their own technology, as the nanobots converted their systems into weapons against them. "You were wrong," Volkov continued. "Humanity does not negotiate with those who threaten our children. We eliminate them. The nanobots you see consuming your fleet are programmed to distinguish between human and non-human technology. They will not harm a single human vessel, but they will consume every alien ship in this system." Keithmore tried to speak to order a response, but his voice failed him. Around his own ship, he could see the hull plating beginning to shift and flow. The nanobots had reached the infinite glory. "The weapon is self-limiting," Vulov said. "After consuming all available non-human technology, the nanobots will deactivate. Your species will survive, but your military capabilities will be reduced. Consider this a lesson in the consequences of threatening humanity." The transmission ended, leaving Keithmore alone with the horror of what was happening to his fleet. Through the viewing ports, he could see other ships in various stages of dissolution. Some were completely gone, leaving only clouds of nanobots. Others were partially consumed, their crews evacuating, and whatever escape pods had not yet been converted. "Admiral," his chief engineer reported, "we've lost main power. The nanobots have consumed our reactor core and are using it to build more of themselves. I estimate 15 minutes before complete structural failure." Keithmore slumped in his command chair, watching as the most powerful military force in the galaxy was systematically destroyed by a weapon that turned their own technology against them. The humans had not just defeated them. They had shown that all their advanced weapons and sophisticated defenses were useless against an enemy that could convert those very advantages into weapons. "Sir," the communications officer said weakly, "should we send a surrender message?" Keithmore almost laughed. Surrender to whom? The human ship was still there, still intact, but it was no longer the target of the nanobots. The weapon was specifically designed to ignore human technology while consuming everything else. "Send a fleet-wide evacuation order," he said finally. "All personnel to escape pods abandon ship." As the crew of the Infinite Glory prepared to abandon their vessel, Keithmore took one last look at the tactical display. In less than 2 hours, the HFY had lost 90% of its military strength to a single human ship. The survivors would return home with news that would change the galaxy forever. The humans were not just another primitive species to be bullied into submission. They were something far more dangerous. A civilization that was willing to destroy everything, including themselves, rather than submit to alien rule. In the depths of space, the nanobots continued their work, converting the pride of 12 civilizations into more copies of themselves. And through it all, the Nemesis waited patiently, its crew watching as humanity's message was written in the dissolution of alien warships. The galaxy had wanted to know what humans sent instead of diplomats. Now they knew. High Chancellor Vexar received the emergency transmission while attending a cultural ceremony on his homeworld of Zephyr Prime. The message was brief, but devastating. Fleet destroyed. Nanobots. Request immediate evacuation of all hegemony systems. At first, Vixtar thought it was some kind of joke. The combined fleet at the human border represented the greatest military force in galactic history. How could it simply be destroyed? And what were nanobots? But as more reports arrived, the terrible truth became clear. The humans had not sent negotiators or surrender offers. They had sent a weapon that violated every principle of civilized warfare. A weapon that consumed technology itself. "Show me the sensor recordings," Vexar ordered his communication staff. The holographic display in his office showed the final moments of the hegemony fleet. Vexar watched in growing horror as ship after ship dissolved into clouds of metallic articles. The mighty dreadnoughts that had maintained galactic peace for centuries were consumed as easily as insects in acid. "How many ships survived?" he asked. "Approximately 200, Chancellor," his aide, Kelnara, reported. Most of them small escort vessels that were far enough from the initial deployment to escape. All capital ships were lost. Vexar felt his foreheart racing as the implications became clear. In a single engagement, humanity had crippled the military power of 12 civilizations. But worse than the immediate loss was what it represented. The humans possessed a weapon that could destroy any technological civilization. "What about our shipyards?" Our orbital installations. Kalara's expression grew even more grim. Chancellor, we're receiving reports from across space. The nanobots appear to be spreading. Our deep space monitoring stations have gone silent. 3 major shipyards have been completely consumed. The reports continued to arrive throughout the day, each one worse than the last. The nanobots were not just a weapon that destroyed ships. They were a plague that consumed all non-human technology they encountered. Space stations, orbital platforms, even satellites were being converted into more nanobots. On the industrial world of Saurian Prime, the reptilian Admiral Morak watched from a mountain bunker as the planet's orbital shipyards disappeared. The massive construction platforms that had built warships for 1,000 years were dissolving like sugar in water. Their metal and circuits converted into swarms of microscopic machines. Sir, one of his officers reported, the nanobots have reached the surface installations. Our manufacturing centers are being consumed. Morak had built his career on the principle that superior firepower could solve any problem. He had conquered rebellious worlds, destroyed pirate fleets, and enforced hegemony law across dozens of star systems. But how do you fight an enemy that turns your own weapons against you? What about ground forces? He asked. Surely these nanobots cannot affect soldiers and equipment on planetary surfaces. The answer came within hours. The nanobots could indeed affect ground-based technology. They consumed tanks and aircraft with the same efficiency they had shown against spaceships. Only biological troops with primitive weapons were safe, and the hegemony had not trained for primitive warfare in centuries. On the Silicon Confederation homeworld, a different kind of tragedy was unfolding. The silicon-based beings who made up the Confederation existed in a symbiotic relationship with their technology. Their bodies were partly mechanical, enhanced with computer implants and cybernetic organs. Dr. Veltar, the Confederation's leading scientist, studied the nanobots through a sealed observation chamber. What she saw challenged everything she understood about the laws of physics and engineering. The nanobots are impossibly sophisticated, she reported to the Confederation Council. They can distinguish between human and non-human technology at the molecular level. They appear to have some kind of built-in database that recognizes the atomic signatures of every known alien alloy and computer component. How is that possible? Asked Council Leader Zerath. It should not be possible, Dr. Veltar replied. The computational power required to make such distinctions in real time would require a computer the size of a moon. Yet these nanobots, each one smaller than a virus, somehow possess that capability. The most disturbing part was that the nanobots seemed to learn and adapt. Early attempts to fight them with energy weapons had failed, because the nanobots quickly developed resistance to different types of energy. They absorbed plasma bolts, deflected laser beams, and converted particle beam weapons into more raw material for replication. But the true scope of the disaster became clear when the reports from the outer systems arrived. The nanobots were not just spreading randomly. They were targeting the most critical installations first: communication arrays, sensor networks, military bases. It was as if they had been programmed with detailed knowledge of hegemony infrastructure. Within 72 hours of the initial deployment, the Galactic Hegemony had effectively ceased to exist as a military power. Their fleets were gone, their shipyards consumed, their industrial capacity destroyed. Billions of beings found themselves trapped on their homeworlds, cut off from the galactic community they had ruled for 3 millennia. Chancellor Vexar stood in his office, watching the reports stream in from across what had once been hegemony space. Each new message brought word of another system going dark, another installation being consumed by the unstoppable nanobots. Chancellor, Kellner said quietly, we're receiving a transmission from Earth. It's being broadcast on all frequencies. The main display activated, showing a middle-aged human female in a military uniform. Vexatar recognized her from intelligence files. Admiral Sarah Chen, commander of Earth Space Forces. I am Admiral Chen of the United Earth Space Command, she began. 72 hours ago, the Galactic Hegemony delivered an ultimatum to humanity. You demanded that we abandon our colonies and withdraw to our home system. You threatened to use force against civilian populations if we refused. Chen paused, her expression cold and professional. Humanity has responded to your ultimatum. As you have no doubt observed, Your military forces have been neutralized. Your shipyards and weapons production facilities have been eliminated. Your ability to threaten human colonies no longer exists. Vexar felt a chill run through his body. The human's tone was not that of a victor gloating over a defeated enemy. It was the tone of someone delivering a business report. The nanobots deployed by our forces are programmed with specific limitations. Chen continued. They will consume all non-human technology they encounter, but they will not harm biological life directly. Your populations are safe, but your technological civilization has been reset to pre-industrial levels. The implications hit Vexar like a physical blow. The hegemony species had been dependent on advanced technology for thousands of years. Most of their worlds could not support their populations without technological assistance. Food production, water purification, atmospheric processing, all of it required the technology that was now being consumed by human nanobots. However, Chen said, humanity is not without mercy. We are prepared to offer humanitarian assistance to refugee populations. We will provide transport, food, and temporary shelter for beings who are willing to relocate to designated worlds, where they can rebuild their civilizations. Vexar almost laughed at the irony. The humans were offering to help the same beings they had just defeated. It was either incredible generosity or incredible arrogance. This assistance comes with conditions, Chen continued. Any species that accepts human aid must agree to formal non-aggression treaties. You will not threaten human colonies, human civilians, or human interests. You will not attempt to rebuild military forces capable of interstellar warfare. You will exist peacefully within the boundaries we establish. The transmission ended, leaving Vexir alone with the magnitude of humanity's victory. In less than a week, the humans had gone from being an unknown primitive species to the dominant power in this region of the galaxy. They had not just defeated the hegemony, they had completely restructured the balance of power. "Sir," Kalara said hesitantly, "what are your orders?" Vexar looked out the window of his office at the city below. Already, he could see the effects of the nanobot plague. Power grids were failing as the technology that maintained them was consumed. Transportation systems were shutting down. In a matter of days, his advanced civilization would be reduced to a pre-technological state. "Send a message to all hegemony worlds," he said. "Finally tell them to begin evacuation procedures. Accept the human offer of assistance." It was the hardest decision he had ever made. But Vexar understood that pride was a luxury his species could no longer afford. The humans had demonstrated that they possessed weapons capable of destroying any technological civilization. Resistance would only lead to complete extinction. As he composed the surrender message, Vexar reflected on the chain of events that had led to this moment. The hegemony had been so confident in their superiority, so certain that primitive humans would submit to their demands. They had failed to consider that a species desperate enough might develop weapons that violated every principle of civilized warfare. The humans had sent their message to the galaxy, written in the dissolution of the greatest military force in known space. That message was simple: threaten humanity's children and face the consequences. Across the former hegemony territory, the nanobots continued their work, consuming the remnants of 3,000 years of galactic civilization. And through it all, human ships arrived to offer aid to the refugees, providing food and shelter to the beings whose empires they had just destroyed. It was perhaps the most terrifying display of power the galaxy had ever seen. The ability to completely destroy an enemy civilization, while simultaneously offering to help them rebuild it. 6 months after the nanobots had finished their work, Ambassador Elena Vasquez stood in what had once been the Grand Assembly Hall of the Galactic Hegemony. The massive chamber on the neutral world of Concordia had been designed to hold representatives from hundreds of species. But today, only a dozen delegates sat in the vast space. The survivors of the hegemony disaster had gathered to establish what they called the New Galactic Council. It was a much smaller, much humbler organization than its predecessor. The species that had once ruled hundreds of worlds now governed only the refugee settlements that human mercy had allowed them to establish. Vasquez was not what the alien delegates had expected from humanity's representative. She was a career diplomat, not a military officer. She spoke softly and smiled often, showing none of the cold menace that Captain Volkov had displayed 6 months earlier. But everyone in the chamber understood that her gentle demeanor was backed by the most terrifying military force the galaxy had ever known. Friends, Vasquez began using the translator device that allowed her words to be understood by all present. I want to thank you for agreeing to establish this new council. Earth believes that cooperation between species is essential for galactic peace and prosperity. Former High Chancellor Vexstar, now simply called Speaker Veer, listened to the humans' words with a mixture of admiration and fear. The humans had done something unprecedented in galactic history. They had completely destroyed their enemy's ability to fight, then offered to help them rebuild. It was either the most generous act ever recorded, or the most sophisticated form of psychological warfare ever devised. Ambassador Vasquez, Speaker Vexer said, "My people are grateful for the assistance humanity has provided." The refugee settlements on New Zeal. Vasquez nodded understandingly. "I know this transition has been difficult for all of you. Your species ruled this region of space for 3,000 years. Now, you find yourselves dependent on human goodwill for your survival. That must be challenging." The understatement was almost cruel in its accuracy. The former rulers of the galaxy now lived in settlements that existed only because humanity allowed them to exist. Their technology was limited to what the humans deemed safe. Their territories were tiny, compared to the vast empires they had once controlled. Admiral Morak, now reduced to governing a single world of Sarian refugees, spoke with barely controlled anger. "You destroyed our civilizations, then offered to help us rebuild them according to your specifications. Is this what humans call mercy?" Vasquez turned to face the Saurian leader, her expression remaining calm, despite the hostility in his voice. "Admiral, let me ask you a question. When your species first encountered the human, 6 months ago, what did you expect to happen?" "We expected you to negotiate," Morag replied, "to accept reasonable limitations on your expansion in exchange for hegemony protection. And if we had refused those limitations," Mordak was quiet for a moment, "we would have enforced them." "How?" "Military action against your colonies." Vasquez nodded. "So your plan was to threaten our civilians, including children, until we submitted to your demands. And if we refused, you would attack those civilians directly. That is how galactic politics work," Mork said defensively. "The strong guide the weak. Order is maintained through the threat of force." "The strong guide the weak," Vasquez repeated. "An interesting philosophy. Tell me, Admiral, in this new galaxy, who would you say are the strong and who are the weak?" The question hung in the air like a blade. Everyone in the chamber understood the answer. Humanity now possessed the only functional military force in this region of space. Every other species existed only because humans allowed them to exist. Doctor of the Silicon Confederation spoke up. "Ambassador, what are humanity's long-term intentions? Will you rule us as we once ruled others?" Vasquez smiled, but it was not a cold expression like Captain Vulov's had been. "Doctor, humanity has no desire to rule other species. We want to build a galaxy where our children can grow up safely, where human colonies can prosper, without fear of alien ultimatums." She gestured to the chamber around them. "This council exists to prove that such a galaxy is possible. You are here as equals, not as subjects. Your species are free to rebuild your civilizations, develop your cultures, even expand to new worlds. The only limitation is that you cannot threaten other species. And who enforces that limitation? Ask the representative of the Crystal Mines, a species of energy beings who had once controlled vast networks of technological nodes, the same force that destroyed the hegemony fleet." Vasquez replied simply, "Humanity will not tolerate threats to innocent civilians, regardless of which species makes those threats." The message was clear. The new galactic order would be based on the principle that military force could not be used to coerce civilian populations. Anyone who violated that principle would face the same fate as the old hegemony. "But what about growth?" Speaker Vexstar asked. "What about expansion, trade, technological development? How can our species prosper under such restrictions?" Vasquez activated a holographic display, showing the local region of the galaxy. Red zones marked the areas that had been consumed by nanobots, while green zones showed the refugee settlements and new colonies that were being established. "Look at what we've accomplished in just 6 months," she said. The Zaharian agricultural colonies are producing food surpluses. The Saurian mining operations have identified rich asteroid fields for exploitation. The Silicon Federation has developed new computing technologies that don't trigger the nanobots' consumption protocols. It was true. In the 6 months since the hegemony's fall, the refugee species had made remarkable progress. Without the burden of supporting massive military forces, they had been able to focus their efforts on peaceful development. Humanity has learned something important, Vasquez continued. Military strength is not the same as true power. The hegemony had the strongest fleet in the galaxy, but they were vulnerable because their entire civilization depended on that fleet. When the fleet was destroyed, everything else collapsed. She pointed to another section of the display showing human space. Human colonies are designed to be self-sufficient. Our ships carry tools for building, rather than just weapons for destroying. Our expansion is driven by families seeking new homes, not military commanders seeking new territories to control. The delegates listened in silence as Vasquez outlined humanity's vision for the galaxy. It was radically different from the old hegemony system. Instead of a pyramid of power, with the strongest species at the top, humanity proposed a network of independent civilizations bound by mutual non-aggression agreements. Of course, Vasquez said, this system only works if everyone follows the rules. The moment any species begins threatening others, the balance collapses. Admiral Merak leaned forward. And what happens to species that break these rules? Vasquez's expression became serious. The same thing that happened to the hegemony fleet. Humanity has learned that the only way to ensure lasting peace is to make the cost of war unacceptably high. She paused, looking around the chamber, at the representatives of species that had once ruled the galaxy. 6 months ago, your civilizations made a choice. You decided that humanity should be forced to submit to your will through threats of violence. You learned that humanity makes different choices when threatened. The silence that followed was profound. Everyone in the chamber understood that they were not just establishing a new government, but a new form of galactic civilization, one where military might could not be used to subjugate other species. Ambassador, Dr. AR said finally, what guarantee do we have that humanity will not become like the old hegemony? What prevents you from using your superior weapons to establish a human empire? Vasquez smiled sadly. Doctor, I think you misunderstand something fundamental about human nature. We didn't develop the nanobots because we wanted to conquer the galaxy. We developed them because we were afraid. She activated another display, this one showing the rapid expansion of human colonies. For the first time in our species' history, we had children growing up on worlds other than Earth. When the hegemony threatened those children, we realized that conventional weapons would not be enough to protect them. The truth was even more terrifying than conquest. Humanity had not set out to destroy galactic civilization. They had simply been willing to do whatever was necessary to protect their young. The nanobots were designed as a last resort. Vasquez continued, a weapon to be used only if humanity faced extinction. The fact that we deployed them shows how seriously we took your ultimatum. Speaker Vexar finally understood. You saw our threat as a threat to your species' survival. Of course we did, Vasquez replied. You demanded that we abandon our colonies and confine ourselves to a single star system for a species that had just begun to spread among the stars, that was equivalent to a death sentence. The implications were staggering. The hegemony had not been destroyed by an aggressive human empire seeking conquest. They had been destroyed by a frightened species protecting its children. That somehow made the defeat even more complete. So what now? Asked the representative of the Hive worlds. How do we move forward? Vasquez deactivated the displays and turned to face the assembled delegates. Now we build something better. A galaxy where species can grow and prosper without threatening each other. A galaxy where children of all species can look up at the stars and see possibilities instead of threats. She walked to the center of the chamber, where a ceremonial table held the documents that would establish the new Galactic Council. Earth is prepared to sign these agreements as an equal partner. We offer our protection to any species that commits to peaceful development. We offer our friendship to any civilization that respects the rights of others. One by one, the delegates approached the table and signed the agreements. Each signature represented not just a commitment to peace, but an acknowledgement of the new reality. Humanity was now the dominant power in this region of the galaxy, not through conquest but through demonstrated capability. As the ceremony concluded, Vasquez looked out through the chamber's great windows at the stars beyond. Somewhere out there, human children were growing up on distant worlds, safe from the threats that had once hung over their futures. It had cost the galaxy its old order, but perhaps something better would rise from the ashes. The aliens had wanted to know what humans would send, instead of negotiators. Now they knew humans sent the future itself, written in the mathematics of mutual destruction and mutual survival. The galaxy would never be the same.